Now we're going to start talking about storage, hard drives. So storage buses, which is basically the interface of connecting any hard drive to a motherboard. A special type of expansion bus dedicated to communicating with storage devices. So right off here, we're going to look at two, and I just made these visual for you. This one is the old school, back when PCI was like new. We were using what we called parallel, which used parallel communication, and that was your IDE hard drives. Your IDE hard drives is what you're seeing here. This would have an old school power connector called a Molex, and then it would connect the actual data portion would be through a ribbon cable, which is a 40-pin parallel ribbon cable. Now, with that, these ribbon cables could support 2 hard drives per cable, which is different than today's standard. SATA, we can only support 1 drive per cable. This is completely out of date, and you shouldn't even be able to find any type of parallel ATA connectors on a motherboard. You shouldn't really find any of them anymore. I mean, unless you're out at an old yard sale and you dug up some piece of equipment. Another type of connection, which was heavily used back in the day for servers, that was called SCSI. What? SCSI. SCSI is a weird name, I understand. But SCSI, Small Computer System Interconnect. SCSI allowed you to daisy chain more than 1 hard drive together, or you could use more than 1 CD-ROM for external devices together. Again, outdated, so is this. I just wanted to explain it to you so you're well-rounded and versed in the IT world information. Parallel ATA, IDE, and eIDE are all to the wayside. So is SCSI. So the SATA is now getting phased out, but SATA, serial ATA, serial communication that we discussed, this is the SATA cable that plugs in commonly to your hard drives, to your, if you're using them anymore, your CD drives or Blu-rays. All right, so it replaced the old parallel ATA, and it's now used for solid state drives, as you can see here. And this is using a SATA interface. So it has a 7-pin data cable. That's what you see here. And that plugs into the actual hard drive, which then gets fed directly into the SATA controllers on the motherboard. 1 SATA controller, 1 wire, 1 hard drive. You cannot add more than 1. That's why you'll find multiple SATA controllers on your motherboard for multiple hard drives or other devices you may want to connect via SATA. And M2 is a different type of form factor, which form factor means physical characteristics. So when we plug in an M2 card, which is another type of hard drive, this is only being fed via M2 port. We looked at that in the beginning of the class on the diagram of the motherboard. So this cannot be confused with SATA. You can't see a board, see this port and go, oh, I can put a SATA hard drive. No, it doesn't have a wire. It doesn't connect into a controller. The card plugs directly into the port on the motherboard. So with that said, this board has your old legacy IDE connections that would use that parallel cable. You know, the ribbon-looking cable, never going to see that again. So normally you won't see that. But it does have SATA ports also. And these SATA ports allow you to plug in multiple drives or devices via SATA. Other type of connectors we're going to talk about on a motherboard is your front panel connectors. When you're taking apart a computer, one of the most challenging, which you would think is not, but it is to keep straight the front panel of that computer. So what I mean by that is you may have lights that display on the front of the desktop, or you may have different USB drives that you think you're plugging into. You're not plugging directly into the board there. You're plugging into a wire that gets fed back into the motherboard. So you need to keep all the front panel connectors straight so when you disassemble, you can reassemble them. We also have internal USB connectors. That's kind of what we're talking about. So when you plug in a USB in the front of your desktop, it really is getting fed through a wire that plugs directly into a USB connector on the motherboard. There's also power and fan connectors. And we're going to learn about these in our power supply portion. But the main power for all motherboards are called a 24-pin power supply connector. It's also referred to as P1, which you don't see up here, but we will discuss. So a P1 or 24-pin means that's where the entire power supply for the motherboard gets its juice, is in the 24-pin P1 connector. Older connectors, older equipment used Molex. Molex connectors are, again, not found very much coming off of power supplies today because they don't use that type of voltage for newer types of equipment. And we will see this, again, differently in a different chapter.